After my husband emptied the account for my son's surgery, he bought a sports car. When I asked why, he said, "We deserve to live too." At the funeral, I placed the car keys in his hand and said, "Drive to HLL, you've already K-lled one of us." He didn't show up to the burial. I used to think love could endure anything. That was before I learned that sometimes the people closest to you, the ones you trust with everything, are the ones who will destroy you the most. My name is Lorraine Parker, and for the longest time, I believed I had built the kind of life most people dream of. I married young, at 26, to a man who swept me off my feet with charm and ambition. Victor Parker. He had a way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world, back when we first met. We were young, stupid, and full of dreams, the kind that make you believe that if you just work hard enough, love will always be enough. We settled in Dallas, Texas, bought a modest house in the suburbs, and started a family. Life wasn't always easy, but we made it work. Victor was in sales, insurance, real estate, whatever paid the bills. I worked in a dental office, managing appointments and handling paperwork. We were never rich, but we had stability. Then, our son Brandon was born, and everything changed. From the moment he took his first breath, I knew something was different. He was beautiful, perfect in every way, but fragile. He had a congenital heart defect. The doctors caught it early, warned us that he would need surgeries, medications, constant monitoring. They said he could live a long, happy life if we stayed ahead of it. That became my purpose. My life. Every decision we made revolved around keeping him safe. I quit my job to be home full-time. Victor worked longer hours to cover medical bills, and we started setting money aside for the future, for the inevitable. For a while, it felt like we were winning. Brandon was small for his age, but full of life. He loved cars, football, and video games. He was a little fighter, and I was so sure that we were doing everything right. Then, when he turned 12, everything fell apart. One night, he collapsed while brushing his teeth. Just crumpled to the floor like a doll whose strings had been cut. I heard the thud from the kitchen and ran. His lips were turning blue. His tiny chest barely moved. Ava, my daughter, stood frozen in the doorway, too scared to scream. I called 911. I rode in the ambulance with him, my hands gripping his as I whispered, "Stay with me. Please, stay with me." At the hospital, the doctors told us what I had feared for years. His heart was failing faster than expected. He needed immediate surgery. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't something we could delay or discuss. Without it, we would lose him. I told them yes. Of course, yes. Then they told me the cost. $82,000. I wasn't scared, I was relieved. We had been preparing for this for years. I knew we had savings. Victor and I had agreed to keep a fund specifically for emergencies like this. So I logged into our account that night, while Brandon slept in his hospital bed, machines beeping softly around him. My fingers trembled as I typed in my login details. And then I saw it. $317.42. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A glitch. I refreshed the page, checked every linked account. But no, it was real. The savings were gone. My stomach turned to stone. I scrolled through the transaction history, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then I found it. Withdrawal, $82,000. 2 weeks ago. My hands went numb. My mind went blank. I stared at the screen, my thoughts scrambling for an explanation. There had to be a reason. A medical expense I forgot about. A bank error. Something. But deep down, I already knew. I called Victor. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Lorraine." I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. "Where's the money?" There was a pause. Then, a slow exhale. "Lorraine, I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" Another pause. "Then, I bought something for us. A car." It took me a moment to understand the words, to process them. "A car." My voice sounded strange, distant. "You bought a car?" "With our son's surgery money. We deserve to live too," he said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. And that was the moment my marriage ended. Not on paper. Not in any legal sense. But in that exact second, something inside me shattered so completely that there was no coming back. I don't remember what I said next. I think I screamed. I think I cried. Maybe both. Victor didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "We deserve to live too." I hung up and spent the next 24 hours in a fog of desperation. I begged. I borrowed. I called every friend, every family member. I sold jewelry, electronics, anything that had value. Somehow, I got the money. Brandon was prepped for surgery the next morning. I kissed his forehead before they wheeled him away, told him I'd see him soon. He never woke up. The funeral felt like a bad dream. The kind where nothing makes sense, where people's faces blur together and the world tilts at odd angles. Ava clung to me, her small body shaking. I don't even know what I said to her. I don't know what I said to anyone. But I do know what Victor said. Nothing. He stood in the back, hands in his pockets, face blank. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. And when it was time to lower our son into the ground, he was gone. I found him later at home, polishing the damn car. He didn't even look up when I walked in. I didn't speak. I didn't yell. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the car keys, walked over and pressed them into his palm. I leaned in close. Drive to hell, I whispered. You've already killed one of us. Then I walked away. The next morning, I filed for divorce. Victor didn't fight it. He signed the papers without a word. A month later, I heard he sold the car. I don't know where he is now. I don't care. People tell me grief softens with time. That'll heal. That one day, it won't hurt so much. Maybe they're right. But not today. The days after the funeral blurred together in a haze of paperwork, grief, and silence. I moved like a ghost through the house, going through the motions of life, but never really feeling present. Ava was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. She was just 9 years old, and she had already lost the one person who had understood her better than anyone. Brandon and Ava had been inseparable. He was the protective older brother, the one who made her laugh when she was scared of the dark, the one who helped her with math homework when I was too tired after work. Now, without him, she seemed smaller somehow, like a part of her had gone missing. I tried to be strong for her. I tried to make sure she ate, that she slept, that she still felt safe. But the truth was, I didn't feel safe myself. I was living in a house that no longer felt like a home. A house where my son's laughter used to echo in the hallways, but now was filled with an unbearable silence. A house where my husband had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Victor was gone, but his presence still lingered in the things he left behind. His clothes in the closet. His cologne in the bathroom. The empty space on the dresser where he used to throw his wallet and keys every night. I wanted him erased. I wanted every trace of him gone. But life isn't that simple. Divorce isn't that simple. Even though he had signed the papers, there was still a process. Court dates, mediation, splitting assets, and worst of all, his attempt to act like he was still a father to Ava. I don't know if it was guilt or just his ego, but he started showing up unannounced, like he expected us to act like a family again. The first time. It was a week after the funeral. Ava and I had just finished dinner when the doorbell rang. My stomach twisted as I walked to the door, already knowing who it was. Victor stood there, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, his hair neatly styled like he was about to walk into a business meeting. Hey, he said casually, like he hadn't abandoned us in the worst moment of our lives. I wanted to see Ava. I stared at him, my grip tightening on the doorknob. She's asleep, I lied. His eyes flickered with something annoyance, maybe disappointment, but he didn't push. I'll come by tomorrow then. No, you won't. My voice was flat, emotionless. His jaw tightened. Lorraine, I still have rights as her father. I could have left. I could have screamed. But I was too damn tired for either. You lost the right to be her father the second you chose a car over your son's life. For the first time, something in his expression cracked. A flicker of guilt, regret, maybe even shame. But it was too little, too late. I shut the door in his face. He didn't come back for a while after that, but I knew it wasn't over. Victor was like a disease. Just when you think it's gone, it finds a way to come back. And I was right. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from his lawyer. Victor was fighting for shared custody. The letter sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to open it. I knew what it was the moment I saw the return address, his lawyer's office, stamped neatly in the corner. When I finally forced myself to read it, my hands shook with rage. Joint custody. Victor wanted shared custody of Ava. I could barely process the words. This man, the same man who had stolen the money meant to save our son, the man who hadn't even bothered to show up to his own child's burial, thought he had the right to take my daughter from me. I gripped the edges of the letter so tightly my knuckles turned white. He wasn't going to win. I would make damn sure of that. But just because something is right doesn't mean it's easy. I hired a lawyer the next day. Deborah Castillo, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had been practicing family law longer than I had been married. When I walked into her office and told her my story, she didn't flinch. She just leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and said, "This is going to get ugly." I nodded. I already knew. Victor, for all his flaws, had money. Or at least, access to it. His career in sales had always been unstable. One year we were barely scraping by. The next he was throwing cash around like it grew on trees. But now, without a wife and child to support, he was living freely. And apparently, that meant he could afford a high-powered family attorney to fight for the right to keep a grip on Ava. The court process moved faster than I expected. Too fast. Within weeks, we were both sitting across from each other in a conference room, forced mediation before the official custody hearings. I hadn't seen him in nearly a month. He looked different. New suit, new haircut, new life. But when his eyes met mine, he had the audacity to look wronged. Like I was the one who had betrayed him. The mediator, a neutral third party appointed by the court, wasted no time. She cleared her throat and glanced between us. Mr. Parker is requesting joint custody of Ava with equal visitation rights. Mrs. Parker, you've stated that you oppose this. Would you like to explain your reasoning? I inhaled deeply. My hands were clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't break. Not in front of him. Victor abandoned our son in his final moments, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He stole the money that could have saved him and spent it on a car. He didn't even show up to the burial. The mediator shifted in her seat. I could tell she wasn't used to cases like this. Victor finally spoke, his voice calm and rehearsed. Lorraine is grieving, and I understand that. But she's misrepresenting the situation. I love my daughter, and I have every right to see her. I made a mistake, but that doesn't make me a bad father. I let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? That's what he was calling it? Before I could speak, my lawyer, Deborah, leaned forward. Mr. Parker, do you believe that selling your child's future for a luxury vehicle was a mistake or a choice? Victor tensed. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he shook his head. I regret what happened, but that has nothing to do with Ava. I turned to face him fully. It took every ounce of strength I had not to lunge across the table and slap the self-satisfied look off his face. Everything has to do with Ava. She watched her brother die. She watched her mother scramble to fix what you destroyed. And now you want to act like none of that happened? The mediator held up a hand. Let's try to stay focused on what's best for the child. I snapped my gaze to her. You think staying with a man who abandoned one child is what's best for the other? Silence. Victor's lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. Mr. Parker is willing to negotiate visitation hours if full custody isn't an option. He simply wants to remain in his daughter's life. I turned to my lawyer, and she gave me a slow, deliberate nod. I knew what she was thinking. The court wouldn't immediately strip Victor of his rights, no matter how much of a monster he was. Texas wasn't a state that easily cut off fathers unless there was overwhelming proof of neglect or abuse. And financial neglect didn't count. This would take time. And it wasn't going to be easy. But I had one thing that Victor didn't. Ava hated him. That night, I sat on the edge of Ava's bed, brushing her hair like I had since she was little. She had been quiet all day, chewing her nails, staring out the window. She knew what was happening. She wasn't a child anymore, not after everything she had seen. Do I have to go? She asked suddenly. My heart clenched. I had spent so much time fighting, preparing for war, that I had forgotten the most important part. This wasn't just my battle. This was hers, too. Not if you don't want to, I promised. She hesitated. What if they make me? I took a deep breath. Then we fight. She turned to look at me, her small face hardening in a way that no 9-year-old should. I don't want to see him. Ever. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, then you won't. I just had to make sure the court understood that. A week later, I found out Victor had filed for emergency visitation rights. He wasn't just going to back down. He was escalating. And I had no idea just how far he was willing to go. When I got the notice that Victor had filed for emergency visitation, I felt my stomach drop. It was one thing for him to try and argue for shared custody in court. It was another for him to push for immediate, unsupervised time with Ava, especially when she had made it crystal clear that she didn't want to see him. I called Deborah the second I read the letter. She answered on the first ring. I knew he was going to try this, she said, her voice tight with frustration. He's trying to get ahead of the custody hearing by forcing temporary visitation before a judge even makes a final decision. Can he do that? I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Legally? Yes, but whether a judge grants it is another story. I closed my eyes and exhaled. What do? We fight back, she said simply. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, watching Victor play the role of the devoted father. His lawyer had advised him well. He was dressed conservatively, his hair neatly combed, his expression carefully somber. I hated him, The judge, an older man with tired eyes and a thick mustache, skimmed over the paperwork before looking up at Victor. Mr. Parker, you're requesting emergency visitation with your daughter. Can you explain why you believe this is necessary? Victor cleared his throat, sitting up straighter. Your Honor, my wife has been keeping my daughter from me since our separation. I understand that emotions are high after the loss of our son, but I love my daughter, and I want to be part of her life. It's not fair for her to lose both parents just because Lorraine is grieving. I felt my blood boil. He was framing it as though I was punishing Ava by keeping her away from him, as if I were the unreasonable one. The judge turned to Deborah. Mrs. Parker, do you have a response? Deborah stood, calm and composed. Yes, Your Honor. The reason my client has opposed visitation is simple. Ava does not wish to see her father. This isn't a case of parental alienation. This is a child who has expressed a clear and consistent fear of being around a man who abandoned her brother in his final moments. The judge glanced at me. Mrs. Parker, has your daughter directly expressed that she does not want to see her father? Yes, I said, my voice firm. And if I were to speak to her myself, would she say the same thing? Absolutely. The judge sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I could tell he wasn't thrilled about this case. Family court judges saw everything: ugly divorces, custody battles, bitter exes using children as weapons. But this wasn't a standard case. This was different. I want to speak to the child, the judge finally said. Privately. My stomach twisted. I hadn't prepared Ava for this. I hadn't told her that she might have to speak in front of a judge, to say out loud what she had only whispered to me in the dark. But I didn't have a choice. Neither of us did. 15 minutes later, Ava was brought into the judge's chambers. She looked so small sitting in that big leather chair, her little hands folded in her lap. The judge smiled at her gently. Hi, Ava. I'm Judge Martinez. How are you today? She shrugged. Okay, I guess. I know this must be a little scary, but I just want to ask you a few questions about your dad. Is that all right? Ava nodded. Do you love your father? She hesitated. My heart clenched. I think I used to, she said finally. The judge nodded. Do you want to see him? Ava looked down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. No. Why not? She took a shaky breath. Because he let Brandon die. Silence. Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly, his face softening. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Ava's eyes filled with tears. She wiped at them angrily, as if she hated that she was crying in front of a stranger. Mom did everything she could to save Brandon, she said, her voice cracking. She sold stuff, she begged people for help. But Dad, he had the money. And he spent it on a car instead. Judge Martinez didn't say anything. He just let her talk. And then, after Brandon died, he didn't even come to the funeral. He just left. She sniffled. He didn't love Brandon. And he doesn't love me either. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run in there, to hold her, to tell her that none of this was fair, that she shouldn't have to say these things out loud. But she wanted to say them. She needed to. And maybe the judge needed to hear them too. The private interview lasted another 10 minutes. When Ava finally walked out, her face was red and blotchy, but she looked relieved. She ran straight into my arms. I told him everything, Mom, she whispered. I squeezed her tight. I'm so proud of you, baby. An hour later, we were called back into the courtroom. Judge Martinez cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. After reviewing both parties' requests and speaking directly with the child in question, I am denying Mr. Parker's request for emergency visitation. However, I will allow supervised visits at a neutral location for a trial period. If the child still does not wish to see her father after that, we will revisit custody arrangements in the final hearing. I exhaled sharply. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. Victor didn't react. Didn't argue. He just nodded stiffly, as if he had already expected this outcome. But I knew him too well. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And I had no idea what he was planning next. I should have known that Victor wouldn't take the judge's decision quietly. The man had never been one to accept consequences, and losing, especially to me, wasn't something he could tolerate. A week after the court hearing, I got a call from Deborah. He's filing for an appeal. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course he is. We'll fight it, she assured me. But Lorraine, be prepared, he's playing the long game. He doesn't actually care about Ava. This is about control. He's trying to wear you down, hoping you'll get tired of fighting and give in. He doesn't know me very well, then. She chuckled. No, he doesn't. Still, her warning stayed with me. Victor wasn't going to stop until he had either forced Ava back into his life or completely destroyed me trying. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't just fighting him in court. I had my own plan. Victor's biggest weakness had always been his own arrogance. He genuinely believed that people, especially women, were too emotional, too reactive to play the long game. So that's exactly what I did. For the next 2 months, I let him think he was getting to me. I stopped fighting every single thing he did. When he sent aggressive emails demanding more visitation, I didn't respond with anger. I responded with calm professionalism. When he requested additional mediation, I agreed, knowing he'd expose himself in the process. I even let him think I was considering a compromise. I mentioned maybe revisiting visitation terms, acting unsure, as if I was starting to cave. I could see the smugness returning to his face every time we met in court. He thought he was winning. But in reality, he was setting himself up for the biggest fall of his life. The thing about men like Victor is that they're sloppy when they think they have the upper hand. They get comfortable. They get lazy. And Victor? He got reckless. See, while he was busy trying to rebuild his image as a devoted father, he was still living the way he always had, selfishly, recklessly, impulsively. And one night, his carelessness finally caught up with him. Ava had been ordered to do a supervised visit at a neutral location, a local community center. She hadn't wanted to go, but I had told her it was okay, that it wouldn't last forever. But Victor didn't show up. Instead, his girlfriend did. Some 24-year-old Instagram model wannabe named Brielle, who barely even knew Ava. The visitation supervisor called me immediately. I arrived just in time to see Brielle arguing with the staff, waving her phone around, saying Victor had been too busy to come and had sent her instead. "Tell that little brat I don't have all day," she snapped at one of the staff members. And that was it. It took everything in me not to walk over and knock the arrogance off her face, but I didn't need to. The staff documented everything. The court got involved immediately. Victor tried to backpedal. It was a misunderstanding. Brielle wasn't supposed to take my place. I got caught up in work. I had an emergency. But the damage was done. The court ruled that Victor had violated visitation terms by failing to show up and attempting to have an unauthorized third party take his place. And when that ruling came in, I made my move. With Deborah's help, I filed an official motion to terminate Victor's parental rights. Not just reduce visitation. Not just limit contact. Terminate. Completely. And the best part? I had everything I needed to win. His failure to show up for court-ordered visitation, his attempt to pass off parenting duties to a stranger, his financial neglect of his own children, his abandonment of his dying son, the evidence was undeniable. The final custody hearing was brutal. Victor tried everything: tears, apologies, even fake remorse. He swore he would change. He blamed his actions on grief and stress. But no one in that courtroom believed him. Ava testified. She sat there, looking directly at the judge, and said, "I don't feel safe with him. He doesn't love me. He just wants to win." And that was the final nail in his coffin. The judge terminated his parental rights. Victor was done. No more custody. No more visitation. No more control. And the best part? He never saw it coming. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? That Victor would finally give up and slither away? But karma had one last trick up its sleeve. See, Victor had been living well since leaving us. The new sports car, the fancy apartment, the luxury lifestyle. But all of that? Funded by debt. And when the court ruled against him, when he realized he'd wasted thousands of dollars fighting for a child who wanted nothing to do with him, his world crumbled. Within 6 months, he had lost his high-paying job. Turns out, employers don't love hiring men with public records of parental neglect. Sold his car to pay off legal fees, moved into a tiny rental after defaulting on his mortgage, and Brielle? The second his money dried up, she was gone too. Victor, the man who once sneered at me for not knowing how to live, was now the one struggling to survive. Meanwhile, Ava and I thrived. The day the final custody ruling came in, I took Ava out for ice cream. We sat on a bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon, her little feet swinging as she licked her cone. "Is it really over?" she asked. "Yeah, baby," I said. "It's over." She smiled, the first real, genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. Victor was out of our lives. And he had no one to blame but himself.